Hi, it's Katrina. Number 10. Cloning a mammoth. Harvard University genetics professor George Church is one of the leading minds in genome sequencing and gene splicing. Dr. Church is hoping that within the next few years, he will be able to clone mammoth DNA so that the extinct woolly mammoth can walk across the Arctic tundra once more. The company he is working with, Colossal, says they are currently working toward bringing back species that went extinct, primarily the woolly mammoth. Colossal believes they can create a hybrid using gene editing tools to splice together DNA from frozen mammoth remains found in the Siberian tundra with DNA from an Asian elephant. The Asian elephant is the closest living relative to the mammoth, and the resulting offspring created would be known as the mammothant. It would be physically born using the Asian elephant as a surrogate, but would look and act primarily like a woolly mammoth. The woolly mammoth is one of the most recent prehistoric beasts to have gone extinct. Some researchers say that small populations lived in Siberia up until roughly 1700 BC. The largest of these creatures grew to over 10 feet at the shoulder and weighed upwards of 15 tons. What's also interesting about mammoths is that they maintained the permafrost. Part of their behavior was scraping away layers of snow so that cold air filtered into the soil. They were a key part of the ecosystem but went extinct, quite likely due to intense hunting by early humans. Number 9. Lost viruses. Scientists in Siberia recently uncovered an ancient virus hiding underneath the permafrost. The virus was identified as Mollivirus sibericum, and it belongs to a group called giant viruses. As scary as that sounds, the world is not currently at risk of being devastated by yet another pandemic, at least not this one. Since 2003, researchers have found at least 4 major giant viruses frozen in the permafrost. Some believe the extraction of these viruses could bring about global trouble, but nothing all that dangerous has been discovered as of yet. If anything, scientists are using these viruses to learn more about the role climate change plays on sickness and disease. The Mollivirus is estimated to be around 30,000 years old. It's classified as a giant because unlike most viruses that you need an electron microscope to see, the Mollivirus is visible using a perfectly ordinary microscope that you might find in any high school science class. Giant viruses also contain far more genes, upwards of 500 genes, while things like the human immunodeficiency viruses only carry 9. While not immediately a threat, other viruses like this could pose a problem. Researcher Jean-Michel Claverie says that even with the virus frozen in the ice, there could be a few viral particles that are still infectious. And if these infectious particles come into contact with a vulnerable host, the pathogenic virus could spread. It's just a good thing scientists haven't found anything immediately deadly, and we shouldn't worry about catching an ancient virus anytime soon. Number 8. Exploding holes. In Siberia, the ground sometimes spontaneously blows up. Massive gas explosions have been erupting underneath the icy soil of Siberia seemingly unprovoked. It's a very recent phenomenon, and one scientists say is linked to climate change. Craters can now be found all across the Siberian landscape, like pockmarks across the snowy wasteland. The international community first took notice of these strange explosions in 2014, and have been trying to understand them ever since. Evgeny Chuvalin from the Skoltek Center for Hydrocarbon Recovery in Moscow says it's a pure stroke of luck that no fatalities have been caused by the explosions. Many of the craters were found not more than a few miles from commercial areas, where someone could have been standing right in the blast zone. But what's causing the ground to explode? That's the big question, and scientists believe they know the answer. Due to global warming, the surface permafrost is becoming weakened by the thawing process. With this layer of ice gone, there is nothing to keep pressure on the pools of methane gas that have formed deep under the ground. Then, the methane gas can't be held back, and it explodes out of the surface. It's like screwing the plastic cap off a carbonized drink very slowly until suddenly it's too weak to hold back the pressure. Since this is due to climate change, there is no end in sight for the random explosions. They will continue to happen throughout Siberia, wherever the permafrost becomes too weak and too thin. Number 7. The Scythian Warrior. In 2003, the brutalized remains of an ancient Scythian warrior were found in Siberia at the archaeological site of Arzan II. The warrior, along with about 40 others, was buried inside of a massive grave mound. But out of all the skeletal remains found, this man in particular had a very rough time at the end of his life. Researchers meticulously inspected his skeleton. They discovered that in his youth, he had survived a sword blow to the back of his skull. Then, as an adult, he took a triple barbed arrowhead straight to the eye. It shattered the bone under his right eye and lodged into his head. According to Michael Schultz from the University of Göttingen, he was most certainly begging for death. But death did not come as swiftly as the man may have wished. 2,600 years ago, on the cold Siberian steppes, the warrior's comrades tried to help him. Researchers found thin cuts on the bone from where his friends had sliced away his cheek meat in order to try and get the arrow out of his head. They then attempted to use a saw to cut off pieces of bone, still trying to get the arrow dislodged. Finally, a surgeon cracked the bone with a chisel to try to free the arrowhead, but instead, the man died. It was utter torture, but just another day in prehistoric Russia. Number 6. Teenage woolly rhino. The remains of a teenage woolly rhino were found in 2020 in the Yakutia region of Siberia, not far from the remote Tyrek-Hatyak River. This ancient specimen was so well preserved that its brain was still fully intact. Scientists determined it was likely only between 3 and 5 years of age when it passed away. Surprisingly, the adolescent rhino was not at all like the rhinos we see today. In fact, instead of the rough gray skin of African rhinos, it had a thick layer of hair covering its body. It had an extraordinary coat of hazel-colored fur, one thick horn, and great big chompers that it used to crush up its food. The woolly rhinoceros was dated to have lived about 20,000 years ago. It was found to be extremely healthy at its time of death, so well fed that it even had a hump of fat on it. Researchers believe it could have died after it was chased by predators into the water, where sadly it drowned. Number 5. The Dancing Figurine. Not far from the city of Novosibirsk, a construction crew made a shocking discovery while working on a bridge project along the banks of the Ob River. Completely by accident, the team uncovered a small figurine that left them utterly perplexed. The figurine was carved into the likeness of a human caught in the middle of a dance, or perhaps some type of spiritual movement. It was made of pure bronze, a kind of dancing figurine dating back to at least 2,100 years ago. Professor Andrei Borodovsky is an archaeologist with the Russian Academy of Sciences, and he was interviewed about the mysterious figurine by the Siberian Times. He stated that the statue is of an Indian religious dancer, and that it doesn't have anything to do with Siberia or the ancient people who once lived there. It's a major mystery because Novosibirsk and India are separated by roughly 3,000 miles of mountainous terrain. For such a statue to make it so far would have been a journey like no other. The professor labeled the discovery as one of the most significant in the history of Siberian archaeology. He believes the only way the figurine made it from India to Siberia was through trade. It would have been traded multiple times, like a dollar bill that ends up circumnavigating the globe. Someone in India most likely traded it to someone on the Silk Road, and the trading continued until it finally made its way to the Ob River. Because it was found at the exact point where the river is at its narrowest, researchers believe whoever had this thing on them was trying to cross. They must have lost it during the crossing, and it got stuck in the sediment for over 2,000 years. Number 4. The Oldest Permafrost. An international team in Siberia, somewhat accidentally, came across the oldest permafrost in the entire region. They were determining the age of a permafrost layer when they identified the soil at its deepest point to be 650,000 years old. What this means is that the deepest layer of ice in Siberia has been there for over 500,000 years. It's located at the eastern side of the village of Batagai, approximately 164 feet beneath the surface. It's an incredible discovery for one primary reason. According to Dr. Thomas Opel from the Alfred Wegener Institute in Potsdam, the ancient permafrost shows that even during warm weather, it doesn't necessarily melt. This is a big surprise, and something scientists hadn't even really considered. 130,000 years ago, there was a warm spell when the Arctic was around 41 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than it is today. Yet, despite being so much warmer, the permafrost didn't melt. It stayed put, and when the temperature dropped, more and more layers of ice formed to create the wilderness of Siberia we know today. Number 3. Lion cubs. A pair of cave lion cubs have recently been found in Russia. The first to be discovered was a male lion cub named Boris, who was unveiled in 2017. A mammoth tusk collector was looking for ancient ivory along a river in Siberia when he came across the body of the lion. He was estimated to be about 43,448 years old. The year after, a female cub was found less than 50 feet away from the male cub. Researchers named her Sparta, and they say she died 27,962 years ago. That means over 16,000 years separated the lion cubs. Yet they died at the same place and were buried about 30 feet deep in the ice. Both of them were only a couple of months old when they became mummified. Cave lions lived across Europe and Asia up until about 10,000 years ago. They were very similar to modern lions, but more adapted to the frigid climate of the north. They were also about 20% bigger than modern lions. Males didn't have manes, and they were far more terrifying than any predator alive today. Even though they are related to modern African lions, the cave lions would have made them look like baby house cats. Professor Love Dalen with Stockholm University says the female cub Sparta is the best preserved specimen from the Ice Age ever dug out of the frozen soil. She is so remarkably preserved that the color of her fur is still the same as when she was alive. She has no connection to the other cub, and researchers aren't entirely sure why they were found in the same spot. It could have been a landslide that buried their dens, 16,000 years apart. Number 2. One very old bird. A frozen bird from the Ice Age was recently found in Siberia. On the outside, the specimen is pretty grotesque. Its wings are black and brown, and its insides appear to have spilled out. Its legs are also quite frail, and they almost look like tiny twigs. At first glance, it appears to be like any bird that may have fallen out of a tree and gotten stuck in the mud. However, this is dead wrong. This bird is surprisingly believed to be around 46,000 years old. Genetic analysis identified it as a horned lark, a bird that would have lived at the same time as some of the most fantastic beasts since the dinosaurs. It would have flapped its wings around woolly mammoths, maybe woolly rhinoceroses, and possibly even saber-toothed cats and cave bears. The bird was found frozen in the permafrost near the northeastern Siberian village of Belaya Gora. It was uncovered by fossil hunters, a group who searches through the ice and snow for prehistoric ivory and anything they might be able to sell to scientists. The bird specimen seemed pretty important, so they passed it on to researchers at the Swedish Museum of Natural History. After further analysis, researchers at the museum now understand more about this mysterious ancient bird. It was almost definitely the ancestor of 2 subspecies of larks still living today, one in Russia and the other in Mongolia. This is pretty amazing because it is direct evidence of climatic changes at the end of the Ice Age, leading to the formation of new subspecies. The birds were dying out, and evolution took over and propelled them into the future by subtly altering their DNA to better suit their new environment. Number 1. Snow goggles. The oldest eyewear that has ever been found was used by the old Bering Sea culture, a group of people who lived on both sides of the Bering Strait. Some of these folks lived on the Russian side, while others had a camp on the North American side. They were almost certainly related, and both of them most likely came from Russia back when the Bering Strait was the Bering Land Bridge. But with the rise of the sea level, North America was cut off from the rest of the world. The peak of the old Bering Sea culture was likely in the 3rd century AD, although some say they may have survived all the way until 1300. At a graveyard in Ekven, dating back to the 1st century, researchers discovered a pair of extraordinarily old snow goggles made from pure bone. These were used by the people living in the farthest east of Siberia to keep from going blind while traversing the bright white landscape. Another interesting thing is that many of these snow goggles found were different from one another. Some were elaborately decorated, some were not. They were all the same basic design, but done slightly different to show off one's artistic uniqueness. The tradition of building snow goggles remained on both sides of the Bering Strait and was passed along to the Inuit, the Yupik, and the Chukchi. They made their goggles from whale bones and mammoth ivory. They also painted them black to receive even more protection from the brutal Arctic sun. Thanks for watching! What else do you think will be found in the Siberian permafrost as it melts? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe for more amazing discoveries. See you later! Bye!